Good evening, everybody. Calvadaddy here in my beautiful garage, welcoming you to Chapter 6 of The Murder of Bill J. Pumpernickel. After this, there's only 2 more chapters to go. Just to give you a little warning, I will take a little break just to catch my breath. I will make videos in the summer. I promise you that much. I'm just going to take a little break after this whole series is done. Capiche? Let's get right into it. This is Chapter 6, Red-Handed. So where we last left off in Chapter 5, we all know that George Clint blew himself away after the odds turned against him. However, he did leave a note, and in that note, he gave the most up-to-date locations of Paul Edgewood and Nathan Andreessen, the 2 prime suspects accused of entering Mr. Pumpernickel's house and fatally shooting him. Police have not determined who actually pulled the trigger, but they both know these men conspired to kill their mayor and they need to bring them to justice. So as September turned into October, Jack Robinson and Tom Richards assembled a search team of about 20 men. With these men, they would be carrying horse and buggies, restraining equipment, and guns, obviously, because they're police officers. On October 20th, 1889, the search team set out on their mission to locate Paul Edgewood. Because, why are they searching for Paul Edgewood and not Nathan Andreessen? Because in George Clint's suicide letter, he expressed that he had been talking a lot with Paul and admittedly hadn't heard from Nathan in a couple of months. So police knew that this Paul Edgewood guy was somewhere in Nevada and they just needed to look for him and bring him to justice. Before they left, Tom Richards gave a kind of a hype-up speech. It went something like this. Okay, guys, we are about to set out. Reminder, we are looking for a white male, 23, about 6'3", heavy build, brown hair, and maybe a beard. This man is armed and dangerous. If at any point you feel like your life is being threatened or your life is in any imminent danger, shoot to kill. I will not lose any of my men on this trip. Can I hear an aye aye, sir? Aye aye, sir. Then let's bring this guy to justice. So the team set off, and they traveled rather slowly. Because, 1, they're on horse and buggies, and 2, as they were going up out of California and into Nevada, they were combing every city, every area, because who knows, Paul Edgewood could have moved, or George Clint could have just played them and said like that Paul never left California. Who knows? So they decided to comb through California, and it was December of 1889 when they finally crossed the border into Nevada. So Nevada, or at least the section at least, pardon me, not that good on geography, so be nice, please. But this area of Nevada was nice and deserty. It was very flat with very few buildings. However, these buildings were searched, obviously with permission of the homeowners, and when they found nothing, then they just kept on going. So around December 11th, 1889, police made a stop in a sleepy little town called Lovelock, Nevada. Now, why were they in here? Because in one of the houses they had searched, a resident, who will go unnamed due to privacy, said that he had heard from his sister staying in the town that she had seen a man close to the description of Paul Edgewood checking in to the Fritz Hotel. Now, the Fritz Hotel, you needed a lot of money to get into that thing. Police didn't know if Paul Edgewood was rich or not. However, they could arrest him on robbery charges. I don't know. Where do you get that money? Ransom money? Who knows? All that they know is he was staying somewhere in the Fritz Hotel in Lovelock, Nevada. So on December 12th, police at around 4:30 p.m., police entered the hotel and asked the man at the front desk if there was a man by the name of Paul Edgewood staying in any rooms. And the man replied, yes. Yes, there was. Paul Edgewood was staying on the very top floor, which was the 5th floor, in room C38. That is C38. Thank you very much for your time. So the squadron, 10 people, since 10 people stayed behind with the carriages, walked up the spiral staircase through the central staff, which was reserved for staff only because they were catching a murderer. And they finally made it to room C38. It wasn't a very surprising room. It was just like all the other ones. It had gold embroidered letters that said C38. So police knock on the door. They heard movement from inside the room, but no answer. So police, that time a little harder, knocked on the door. Finally, after hearing footsteps, the doorknob jiggled and the door slowly creaked open from the inside. And there, recalls one officer, standing less than a foot away from them, was none other than Paul Edgewood. According to the officers, Paul Edgewood was way bigger than they thought he was, mainly because they were standing so close. One officer recalled that he, quote-unquote, could smell alcohol on Edgewood's breath. Peering inside the hotel room, he could see empty beer bottles and moonshine. He also mentioned that Edgewood had a bit of a body odor. He was wearing a dirty white collared shirt, kind of jeans, dirty ripped up jeans, and cowboy boots on. And he had actually grown a little bit of a beard. He looked like he hadn't shaved in about a month. A nice scruff was growing in. And it looks like he hadn't cut his hair in a bit. That kind of mop top that he had kind of grown out into the sides and was kind of fluffy. It wasn't Nathan Andreasen hair length, but it was definitely fluffier. Paul Edgewood did not look nervous. Instead, he kind of said, "Who the hell are you guys?" Jack Robinson stepped forward. "Sir, I am Detective Robinson from Rattlesnake County. I have been the chief investigator of the murder of our mayor, Bill J. Pumpernickel, on the night of October 27th, 1887. You, sir, are a prime suspect, and therefore, Mr. Edgewood," holding up his handcuffs, he said, "I place you under arrest." In that moment, Paul Edgewood's eyes snapped. "Oh, hell no, I'm not." And at that moment, Paul Edgewood pushed past the men and started, according to one officer, bolting down the hallway, shoving a bellhop out of the way, and racing down the stairs to escape. The police were hot on his tail. "Get him! Get him! Get him!" they all shouted. In the dining room, people could hear a commotion from downstairs. All of a sudden, the doors burst open and out, ran Paul Edgewood with 10 other police officers behind him. Edgewood knew that there must be a party outside waiting for him, so he took the back exit. And that threw the police officers off for a little bit because they lost him for just a little bit. Entering outside, the weather was about 45 degrees and a light snow had fallen. Paul Edgewood remembered that he had abandoned his Harrison buggy in the river the last year and did not have any form of transportation. As he heard the shouting and footsteps growing nearer, he kind of looked around desperately, wanting a horse or a buggy to escape in. Finally, he found a horse tethered to a pole outside the building. The only thing, however, this horse was tethered to a buggy. Paul Edgewood had no choice. He could hear the footsteps of the police officers growing closer and closer. So he said, "Screw it." He He leapt on the horse, spurred it, and after a bit of tugging, because the buggy itself was chained to a pole, the buggy finally ripped free, and Paul Edgewood was on the run. When he was in school, Paul Edgewood was called one of the best horsemen of his class. He could easily navigate stuff, even in all different types of weather. And he was doing this all right, except he had a almost 1-ton buggy swaying behind him, smashing into everything there was, not to mention that there was ice. The police officers were hot on his trail. Edgewood rode his way to town square. He made a sharp turn and smashed the buggy against a brick wall of a building. The buggy sustained catastrophic damages and was ripped free of the restraints tying it to the horse. Edgewood and the horse now gained speed. Paul Edgewood finally made it to town square, where terrified civilians were making run for cover. However, even though some of them were staying to watch because, oh boy, a shootout's gonna happen. What fun! So anyway, Paul Edgewood stops right in the middle of town square and he backs his horse up. The 20 police officers surround him, telling him to surrender now. Paul Edgewood doesn't want to surrender. And this is where time slows down. Paul Edgewood rips out his revolver and aims it at the crowd. One officer in particular, Mr. James Swanson, remembered their officer's command to shoot to kill if your life is in danger. That's what he did. As Paul Edgewood was getting off his horse, threatening to shoot, Swanson fired his gun. And the bullet missed its intended target. It hit him, but it missed its intended target. Instead of a clean headshot or a chest, the bullet slammed into Edgewood's right thigh, right above the knee. Edgewood screamed in pain and dropped his gun as he attempted to hobble away. That was all the officers needed. One of the biggest men of the platoon full-on football tackled Paul Edgewood, sending him flying off the ground, and then they finally landed in a snowy, bloody heap on the town square, as curious civilians were now beginning to crowd around, realizing that the danger is done. Paul Edgewood was obviously not the happiest camper about that, and he kept shouting and swearing at the police officer who was now restraining his arms with metal handcuffs. A photographer about 30 feet away stood by and snapped a photo of the whole incident. Paul Edgewood was brought back up, and with great pain, he was dragged by 2 officers to the nearby jailhouse, where he was in a snowy, bloody heap, thrown in a cell, and the door was slammed shut. Paul Edgewood raced to the bars and screamed at the officers that, they effed up big time, because he was going to break out and he was going to show him no mercy. However, with a wounded leg that was bleeding, that couldn't really be an option for now. In the little cot that was in the jailhouse, he was restrained to it via a handcuff to a wrist, and a doctor was allowed in to bandage up Paul Edgewood's leg. After the bleeding stopped, they stayed there for a couple of days while he was ready to recover. They tried to interrogate him, however, in the end, they found no luck. They simply decided just to head home. And that's what they did. On December 20th, 1889, the entire squadron, unharmed by the way, started making their way back home with Paul Edgewood shackled by the wrists and ankles in a police buggy bound back to Rattlesnake County. The news spread quickly of Edgewood's arrests, and people in Rattlesnake County whooped and hollered when on January 3rd, 1890, the team arrived victorious in Rattlesnake County. As Edgewood was being unloaded from the police buggy, someone in the crowd threw a rock, attempting to hit Edgewood in the head. It narrowly missed him, smashing right above his head, making a dent in the buggy. Paul Edgewood, with the assistance of 2 officers taking either of his arms, was limped inside to a jailhouse where he was placed under custody. Jack Robinson and Tom Richards gave a press conference while saying, they said something along the lines of this: 2/3 of our puzzle are complete. We still have an escapee out there, but fear not, civilians of Rattlesnake County. We will find him. We will find him. And in a quote that would go down in history, Tom Richards said that they were going to, quote unquote, interrogate the hell out of Paul Edgewood and get that guy to open his mouth. And that does it for Chapter 6 of the murder of Bill J. Pumpernickel, red-handed. They caught their guy, however, one more is still on the loose. Who knows? Paul Edgewood may give him some answers. He may not. Let's find out about that next weekend. Calvadaddy, out.